On the edge of a busy international airport, where luxury cars and private jets were more common than taxis and buses, lived a man named Daniel Reyes. He was 32 years old, with tired eyes and calloused hands that told the story of years spent fixing engines instead of chasing dreams. His small garage, squeezed between two larger hangars, barely brought in enough money to keep the lights on. Most days he ate sandwiches he made himself or skipped meals altogether when things got too tight. Life had not been kind to him. He had grown up poor, worked hard, and never found luck on his side. But despite everything, Daniel loved machines. He could look at an engine and hear its problems like most people heard music. One unusually hot morning, as Daniel wiped sweat from his brow and tried to fix a stubborn carburetor, a loud noise echoed across the tarmac. A private jet had landed unexpectedly and refused to start again. The crew looked worried, and the airport staff scrambled to find someone who could help. No one wanted to disappoint the owner, a well-known billionaire named Evelyn Hart. She was famous for her sharp business mind and even sharper temper. When no one among the airport's engineers could figure out what was wrong, someone finally remembered the struggling mechanic working out of a rusty garage nearby. Daniel was skeptical when they called him. He didn't usually work on jets. Those were expensive, complicated machines handled by certified professionals. But he also knew that deep down, all engines were similar. Whether it was a car, a motorcycle, or a multi-million-dollar aircraft, the principles remained the same. So, with nothing but his tool belt and a hint of doubt, he walked toward the tarmac where the grounded jet sat like a confused bird. The moment he arrived, everyone gave him strange looks. He wore an old shirt stained with grease and a pair of worn-out jeans. Compared to the clean-cut engineers and pilots surrounding the jet, Daniel looked completely out of place. Evelyn Hart stood a few meters away, arms crossed, watching him, with a cold expression. She wasn't impressed by appearances, though. She cared about results. And right now her jet wasn't moving, and her schedule was ruined. Without saying much, Daniel started inspecting the engine. He listened carefully, tapped parts lightly with his wrench, and asked a few questions that surprised even the experienced technicians. Within minutes, he figured out the problem: a faulty fuel pump relay, something simple that had somehow been overlooked by the so-called experts. With quick precision, he replaced the part, wiped his hands on his jeans, and signaled that the jet should be ready to go. Moments later, the powerful engine roared back to life. Evelyn watched closely as the mechanics around her exchanged shocked glances. This man, dressed like a laborer and smelling of oil, had fixed what none of them could. She walked over slowly, heels clicking loudly against the concrete floor, and studied Daniel's face. "You fix my jet," she said simply. Daniel nodded, unsure if she was thanking him or testing him. "Yeah, it wasn't too bad once you know what to look for." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. She had met hundreds of people in her life, politicians, celebrities, business moguls, but none of them spoke like this man. There was no flattery, no begging for favors, just honest confidence. She paused, then did something no one expected. She looked directly into his eyes and said, "Marry me." Silence fell over the tarmac. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Airport workers froze mid-step. Pilots stared. Technicians blinked in disbelief. Daniel's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He thought he must have misheard her. "Excuse me?" he finally managed. "I don't believe in wasting time," Evelyn said calmly. "You're smart, humble, and clearly capable. I'd rather spend my life with someone real than another suit-wearing fake." Daniel couldn't breathe. He looked around, hoping someone would tell him this was some kind of joke. But Evelyn stood there, perfectly serious, waiting for an answer. His heart pounded in his chest. He had spent his whole life fighting for scraps, dreaming of something better, and now here he was, being offered a life he had never imagined. Later that day, after being driven to Evelyn's luxurious downtown penthouse, Daniel still hadn't fully processed what had happened. He sat on a soft leather couch that felt foreign under his rough hands, Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from him. "Why me?" Daniel finally asked. Evelyn smiled slightly, which was rare for her. "Because you fixed what others couldn't," she said. "Not just my jet, maybe me too." She explained that despite her wealth and success, she had always felt alone. Everyone around her wanted something: money, power, influence. But Daniel? He didn't ask for anything. He just saw a broken machine and fixed it. Over the next few weeks, their story spread across news channels and social media. Headlines read, "Jet Set Romance. Mechanic Saves Billionaire's Day Gains Her Heart." People debated whether it was true love or just another publicity stunt. Some called it fairy tale nonsense, while others believed in the magic of second chances. But Daniel and Evelyn didn't care about the rumors. They spent time getting to know each other, going on quiet dinners, long walks, and late-night talks. Evelyn introduced Daniel to the world of high society, and he taught her how to change a tire and appreciate the little things in life. They were different, yes, but in many ways that made them perfect for each other. Months later, they got married on the very same tarmac where their lives had collided. Evelyn wore a simple white dress, and Daniel wore a suit borrowed from one of her friends. Friends, family, and even curious airport staff attended the ceremony. It wasn't extravagant, but it was real, and that meant more than any amount of gold or glamour. In the years that followed, Daniel became a symbol of hope for struggling dreamers everywhere. He started a foundation to help young mechanics get training and opportunities they otherwise wouldn't afford. Evelyn supported every initiative, using her wealth to turn Daniel's vision into reality. Together, they built something far greater than anyone expected, a life rooted in honesty, hard work, and unexpected love. And whenever someone asked how it all began, Daniel would always laugh and say, all it took was a broken jet, a lucky break, and a woman who didn't care about polish, just passion. The morning after the proposal, Daniel sat on the edge of a king-sized bed in Evelyn's penthouse, staring at his hands. They were still stained with grease from the previous day's work, and he rubbed them together like he could somehow erase the past few years of struggle. The room around him was quiet, elegant, filled with soft lighting and expensive furniture that made him feel like an intruder. He had never slept in anything this luxurious before. The mattress felt too soft, the silence too heavy. Outside the window, the city stretched wide and bright, but Daniel couldn't enjoy it. His mind was racing. Evelyn entered the room with her usual calmness, dressed in a simple black robe, her hair tied back. She looked like she had just finished reading emails or planning her next business deal. "You're up early," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Daniel gave a short laugh. "Couldn't sleep." She handed him the coffee without asking. "Still thinking about yesterday?" He nodded, taking a sip. "Yeah, what even is this? What are we doing?" Evelyn sat beside him, crossing one leg over the other. "We're making a choice," she said. "That's all life really is, and choices, and sometimes you have to make the bold ones before someone else makes them for you." Daniel looked at her, trying to read between the lines. "But why me? You could have asked anyone. A CEO, a politician, some guy who knows how to wear a suit properly." Evelyn smiled slightly. "I don't want someone who looks good on paper. I want someone who does good in real life. You fixed my jet when no one else could. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't try to impress me. That means more than any fancy degree or bank account." Daniel wasn't sure if he believed her, but there was something about the way she said it, so firm, so final, that made him stop doubting, at least for now. Over the next few weeks, Daniel tried to adjust to the new rhythm of his life. Evelyn insisted he move into her apartment, but he refused at first. "Let me finish what I started at the garage," he said. "I can't just leave those people hanging." So, he kept working, showing up every morning like nothing had changed, fixing engines and wiping oil off his hands before answering calls from Evelyn. She respected his decision, even admired it. She watched as he continued to treat everyone the same, whether they were rich clients or struggling students bringing in broken bikes. Daniel hadn't changed, not really. He still wore his old jackets, still drank cheap coffee, and still drove his beat-up pickup truck. But the world around him did change. News outlets picked up their story, turning it into headlines. Mechanic turned millionaire, and love at first fix. People online debated whether Daniel was genuine, or just lucky. Some called him a gold digger, others called him the modern Cinderella. But none of it mattered to him. He ignored the noise, focused only on staying grounded. Still, there were moments when reality hit hard. One evening, Evelyn took him to a high-end charity gala. It was the kind of event where men wore tuxedos and women wore dresses worth more than cars. Daniel felt completely out of place. He fumbled with his tie, struggled to remember which fork to use during dinner, and spent most of the night awkwardly nodding, while wealthy strangers talked about things he barely understood. At one point, Evelyn caught him standing alone near the balcony. "You okay?" she asked. He sighed. "Just not used to all this." She took his hand. "Then let's go." And they did. Without saying goodbye to anyone, they left the gala behind and went for a drive through the city. They ended up at a small diner by the highway, where Daniel ordered pancakes and Evelyn laughed at how quickly he ate them. That night reminded them both who they were, two people from different worlds who somehow found each other. As the months passed, their relationship grew stronger. Evelyn began visiting Daniel at the garage more often, watching him work, asking questions about engines, and slowly learning the things she never cared about before. In return, Daniel helped her see the value in simplicity, in laughing without reason, in walking barefoot on grass, in enjoying a sunset without needing to take a photo of it. They got married quietly, away from the flashing cameras and gossip columns. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding with thousands of guests and designer gowns. Just a small ceremony on the airport tarmac where they met, surrounded by friends, co-workers, and even a few curious reporters. Evelyn wore a modest white dress and Daniel wore a suit borrowed from one of her associates. When the officiant asked if they took each other as husband and wife, both answered without hesitation. After the wedding, life settled into a new kind of normal. Evelyn continued running her business empire, while Daniel stayed connected to his roots. He opened a training center for young mechanics, funded by Evelyn, but run entirely by him. He wanted to give others the chance he never had. Proper tools, real instruction, and a place where they could learn without worrying about money. Evelyn supported every step of the project. She donated funds, helped hire instructors, and even visited the center regularly to meet the students. To everyone's surprise, she became a familiar face among the trainees, always asking questions and listening carefully. She learned how to change a tire, check engine fluids, and even fix a minor electrical problem under Daniel's patient guidance. People began seeing them differently. No longer just a billionaire and a mechanic, but a team, one built on respect, shared values, and mutual growth. Their love story wasn't perfect, but it was real. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments when they questioned if they were moving too fast. But through it all, they stayed committed to making it work. Years later, when asked how their lives had changed, Daniel would always smile and say, "Not much. We just found someone who understood us better than we understood ourselves." Evelyn, when given the same question, would add, "We found someone who didn't care about my money or his struggles, just the person underneath." Their story became more than just a romantic headline. It became inspiration for people across the world, proof that love could come from the most unexpected places, that success didn't always come with a suit and tie, and that sometimes the right person finds you when you least expect it. And so, on that tarmac where it all began, Daniel and Evelyn continued to build their life, not in luxury alone, but in honesty, hard work, and the quiet joy of knowing they had found something truly rare. The first year of their marriage was not easy. Though Daniel and Evelyn had built a strong foundation, adjusting to life together was like trying to mix oil and water. They both worked well on their own, but blending them required patience, effort, and a lot of learning. Evelyn came from a world where everything was planned, timed, and executed with precision. She woke up at 5 in the morning, worked through breakfast, and often didn't stop until late at night. Daniel, on the other hand, lived by instinct. He went to bed when he was tired, woke up when the sun hit his face, and believed that some things couldn't be rushed, especially machines. At first, these differences caused friction. Evelyn wanted Daniel to take over one of her smaller companies as a way to integrate him into her business world. Daniel politely declined, explaining that he wasn't interested in running an office or managing people who knew more about spreadsheets than engines. "I fix things," he told her. "That's what I'm good at." Evelyn respected his honesty but struggled to understand how someone could be so content doing the same thing every day. She had always chased new challenges, bigger goals, higher profits. But Daniel showed her something different, the joy of repetition done right. He taught her how to listen to an engine's hum, how to feel when something was off just by touch, and how to enjoy the satisfaction of a job well done without needing applause. In return, Evelyn helped Daniel see the value in planning ahead. She introduced him to financial advisors, encouraged him to think long-term, and slowly guided him toward understanding the business side of mechanics. It wasn't always comfortable for him, but he tried. He learned how to read reports, how to manage budgets, and eventually how to build something bigger than himself. Their biggest challenge came when Daniel decided to open a training center for young mechanics. He had seen too many kids give up on their dreams because they couldn't afford proper tools or education. He wanted to create a place where talent mattered more than money, where passion could be nurtured instead of crushed by circumstance. Evelyn immediately supported the idea and offered to fund it entirely, but Daniel refused. "I want to build this with my hands," he said, "not your wallet." They compromised. Evelyn provided the initial investment, but Daniel ran everything else. He hired instructors, designed the curriculum, and personally trained students during his free time. The center opened 6 months later in a small warehouse near the airport. It wasn't fancy, but it was real, filled with eager learners, second-hand tools, and the smell of oil and ambition. Word spread quickly. Local newspapers covered the opening, calling it a billionaire's gift to the working class. Students from all over the city applied, hoping for a chance to learn from someone who had fixed a jet with nothing but a wrench and determination. Evelyn visited often, not as a wealthy donor, but as a student herself. She watched Daniel teach, saw the way he connected with people, and realized that this was where he belonged, not in boardrooms or luxury cars, but in the middle of grease-stained floors and broken engines. Still, not everyone approved of their relationship. Evelyn's business partners questioned whether Daniel was influencing important decisions. Some of Daniel's old friends felt he had changed, that he no longer understood the struggles of working-class people. There were rumors, whispers behind closed doors, and even a few harsh words exchanged in public. But neither Daniel nor Evelyn let it affect them. They had built something real, and no amount of gossip could change that. One evening, after a particularly tough week dealing with media scrutiny and internal company politics, Evelyn sat alone in their apartment, staring out at the city lights. Daniel walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without saying anything and sat beside her on the couch. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, then sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if we're fooling ourselves, if people will ever really accept us." Daniel took a sip of his coffee before answering. "People are always going to talk, doesn't mean they're right." Evelyn looked at him. "But what if they are? What if we're just temporary?" He shook his head. "We're not. You and me, we don't fit into neat little boxes. That doesn't make us wrong. It makes us different. And different is okay." Evelyn smiled slightly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You say the simplest things like they're magic. That's because they are," Daniel replied. "Simple things keep the world running. Engines, relationships, love, they all work best when you don't overcomplicate them." Over time, their lives settled into a rhythm that only they understood. Evelyn continued running her empire, but now she made time for family dinners, weekend drives, and quiet mornings spent fixing small appliances with Daniel. He remained deeply involved in the training center, mentoring students and helping them find jobs in the industry. Together, they became a symbol of balance, wealth and humility, power and simplicity, logic and heart. And though their story started with a broken jet and a spontaneous proposal, it grew into something much deeper. Not just a romance, but a partnership built on trust, growth, and mutual respect. They weren't perfect, but they were real. And sometimes that was enough. Years later, when people asked how they made it work, Daniel would always smile and say, "By remembering who we were before we met, and never forgetting why we chose each other." Evelyn would nod and add, "Because love isn't about changing someone. It's about growing with them." And so, under the same sky where their journey began, Daniel and Evelyn continued forward, not as billionaire and mechanic, but as two people who found something rare, a connection that defied expectations and proved that sometimes the most unexpected stories are the ones worth telling. As the years passed, Daniel and Evelyn's lives settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. The training center had grown beyond what either of them had imagined. What began as a small garage filled with eager students had become a full-fledged school for young mechanics, offering scholarships, internships, and real hands-on experience. The walls were lined with tools, blueprints, and photos of graduates who had gone on to build successful careers in aviation, automotive repair, and engineering. Daniel spent most of his days there, teaching, mentoring, and sometimes just listening. He had a way of making people feel seen, whether they were high school dropouts looking for a second chance or college graduates who wanted to learn something practical. Evelyn visited often, not as a billionaire checking in, but as someone who genuinely enjoyed learning from the students and instructors. She even picked up a few skills herself: how to change an oil filter, how to read engine diagnostics, and how to appreciate the quiet satisfaction of fixing something broken with your own hands. But life wasn't all smooth roads and clear skies. There were moments when the weight of their different worlds pressed down on them. Evelyn still had a demanding schedule, traveling across continents for business deals while Daniel remained rooted in the city, focused on building something lasting. They missed birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet nights together more than they liked to admit. There were fights too, not loud or dramatic, but tense silences and unspoken frustrations. Sometimes Evelyn wished Daniel would understand the pressure she faced running an empire. Sometimes Daniel wished Evelyn would slow down and enjoy life without always chasing the next big deal. One particularly tough week came when Evelyn was forced to cancel their planned weekend getaway at the last minute. A major investor pulled out of a key project, and she had to stay behind to negotiate a solution. When she finally returned home, late Friday night, tired and stressed, she found Daniel already asleep on the couch, a cold plate of food sitting beside him. He hadn't waited dinner for her, not out of anger, but because he had simply given up hoping she'd make it. The next morning, over coffee and silence, Daniel finally spoke. "I miss you," he said quietly. Evelyn looked at him surprised. "I thought you understood." "I do," he replied, "but understanding doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm trying to balance everything. My company needs me." "And I need you," Daniel said, gently. "Not every minute of every day, just some time, real time." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She sat there, thinking about all the things she had built, all the power she held, and realized that none of it mattered if she lost what really mattered, the connection between them. From that point on, things slowly changed. Evelyn started scheduling her trips around Daniel's major events at the training center. She made sure to be present for student graduations, open houses, and whenever Daniel needed support. In return, Daniel tried to understand the pressures of running a global business. He attended a few meetings with her, not to interfere, but to simply be there. A reminder that she wasn't alone in this life. Their efforts weren't perfect, but they were honest. And honesty became the foundation of everything they built together. Outside of their personal struggles, the world continued to watch their story unfold. The media never fully let go of their fairy tale narrative, painting Daniel as the lucky mechanic who won the heart of a billionaire and Evelyn as the powerful woman who finally found love in the most unexpected place. But neither of them cared much about headlines anymore. They had learned to live for themselves, not for public approval. Still, challenges kept coming. One of the biggest tests of their marriage arrived when a former business partner of Evelyn's accused Daniel of misusing funds meant for the training center. It was a false accusation, but it spread quickly through online forums and news outlets. People began questioning whether Daniel truly deserved the success he had achieved. Some claimed he was using Evelyn's money to play hero, while others argued that he was nothing more than a glorified mechanic who got lucky. The accusations stung. For the first time since their marriage began, Daniel considered stepping back from the training center altogether. "Maybe I should just walk away," he told Evelyn one night. "Let someone else run it, someone who doesn't have to prove anything." Evelyn refused to let that happen. "You built that place with your hands, your sweat, your heart," she said. "No one can take that away from you." Together they fought back, not with lawsuits or angry statements, but with facts. They released financial records showing every penny spent at the center, invited journalists to tour the facility, and gave students a platform to speak about how the program had changed their lives. The truth was undeniable. The accusations faded, replaced by admiration for what Daniel and Evelyn had created together. More importantly, the experience strengthened their bond. They had faced doubt, criticism, and fear, and come out stronger on the other side. Years later, standing on the rooftop of their apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Evelyn leaned against Daniel's shoulder. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if that jet hadn't broken down?" she asked. Daniel chuckled. "Probably somewhere hot, covered in grease, fixing someone else's car." Evelyn smiled. "And me? Still flying around the world, probably too busy to notice the ground beneath you." She nudged him playfully. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It's not," Daniel said. "It's just good that I got to remind you sometimes. The best things in life aren't built in boardrooms." Evelyn kissed his cheek. "You did more than remind me, you showed me." Below them, the city hummed with life. Airplanes took off and landed in the distance, carrying people to places unknown. Somewhere out there, another mechanic was working late, wiping sweat from his brow, wondering if his life would ever change. And maybe, just maybe, fate was waiting for him too. On the tarmac, under the wings of a broken jet, ready to write another story worth telling. The years rolled on, and the world around them kept changing, but Daniel and Evelyn remained steady in their life together. The training center had become more than just a place for mechanics to learn. It was now known across the country as one of the best vocational schools for young people who wanted to build real skills and honest careers. What started with a broken jet and a spontaneous marriage had grown into something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. Daniel still spent most of his time there, getting his hands dirty, teaching students how to listen to engines, and reminding them that pride came not from titles or money, but from doing good work. He never lost that simple joy of fixing things, of seeing something broken come back to life under his touch. Evelyn, too, found herself drawn to the center more and more. She no longer dressed in sharp business suits when she visited. Instead, she wore jeans and a clean shirt, ready to learn, to help, or just to be present. But even as they built this life together, challenges continued to test them. One of the biggest came when Evelyn's health began to decline. Years of non-stop work, late nights, and constant stress had taken their toll. Doctors told her she needed to slow down, take time off, and focus on rest. For a woman who had always been in control, the idea of stepping back felt like losing power. At first, she refused. She tried to keep working, pushing through exhaustion, ignoring the pain in her chest and the tiredness in her eyes. Daniel watched it happen, quietly at first, then with growing worry. He saw the way she struggled to get through meetings, how she sometimes forgot to eat, how she would fall asleep mid-conversation. He knew Evelyn well enough to know that telling her what to do would only make her dig in harder. So instead, he led by example. He started waking up early with her, making breakfast, talking about small things, nothing heavy, nothing stressful. He took her on drives through the countryside where the air was clean and quiet. He showed her how to enjoy slow mornings and long walks. And slowly, Evelyn began to change. She started delegating more at work, trusting her team to handle things without her constant oversight. She took short breaks at first, just a weekend here and there. But eventually, she allowed herself full weeks away from the office. It wasn't easy for her. There were days she checked her phone compulsively, reading emails she didn't need to read, worrying about decisions she had already handed over. But Daniel was patient. He reminded her that the world wouldn't fall apart without her, and that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was let go. During this time, Evelyn also started spending more time at the training center. She helped organize student workshops, met with instructors, and even helped teach a few basic mechanical classes. At first, the students were nervous around her, unsure of how to act around someone so powerful. But Evelyn made an effort to break down those walls. She laughed easily, asked questions humbly, and treated everyone with respect. Soon, the students stopped seeing her as a billionaire and started seeing her as someone who genuinely cared. One afternoon, while watching Daniel guide a group of students through engine repairs, Evelyn sat beside him during a break and said, "You know, I think I understand now why you love this so much." Daniel looked at her, wiping oil off his hands with a rag. "Love what?" "This," she said, gesturing toward the workshop, the tools, the students. The ability to fix things, to see something broken and bring it back to life. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, it's kind of the best feeling in the world." Evelyn nodded. "I used to think success was about building something big. Now I realize it's about building something meaningful." Their bond deepened in those months. They learned to move at the same pace, to support each other not just in dreams, but in struggles. Evelyn found peace in slowing down, and Daniel found strength in standing beside her through it all. Outside their personal growth, the outside world still followed their story, though not always kindly. Some critics claimed that Daniel had changed Evelyn, that he had somehow softened her edge, made her less of the fierce businesswoman she once was. Others argued that Evelyn had taken over Daniel's life, turning him into a figurehead rather than the mechanic he had always been. But neither of them paid attention to the noise. They had learned that truth wasn't found in headlines or rumors, but in the quiet moments between them. The way Evelyn leaned into Daniel's shoulder after a long day, the way he always remembered how she liked her coffee, the way they could sit in silence for hours and still feel completely connected. Then came another challenge, one neither of them had expected. A major storm hit the city, flooding parts of the airport and damaging the warehouse where the training center operated. When Daniel arrived the next morning, he found the doors locked tight, watermarks high on the walls, and the smell of damp concrete and soaked metal filling the air. Inside, several tools had been ruined, machines damaged beyond repair, and years of records soaked beyond recognition. The students gathered outside, looking at Daniel with worry in their eyes. This place had given them hope, opportunity, and now it stood silent, broken. Daniel walked through the wreckage slowly, taking it all in. Then he turned to the group and said simply, "We'll rebuild." Evelyn arrived later that day, already on the phone with contractors and insurance agents. Together they assessed the damage, made plans, and within days construction began. They worked side by side, Daniel handling the physical rebuilding, Evelyn managing the finances and logistics. The students pitched in where they could, cleaning, sorting usable tools, and helping carry supplies. Months later, the new training center opened its doors again. Bigger, stronger, better. The students returned, eager and grateful, and Daniel stood at the entrance watching them walk in, knowing that every setback had only made them more determined. Standing beside him, Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. "You really are amazing," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No, we are." And that was the truth. Not just Daniel, not just Evelyn, but them. Two different souls who had found each other on a tarmac, fixed what was broken, and built something real from the pieces. And as the sun rose over the city, casting golden light across the rebuilt workshop, they both knew one thing for certain: their story was far from over. Years passed and the world kept turning. But for Daniel and Evelyn, time moved differently. It wasn't about chasing success or proving anything anymore. It was about building something that lasted, something real. Not just a marriage, but a life filled with purpose, love, and shared dreams. The training center had grown beyond what either of them could have imagined. What started as a small garage where Daniel fixed engines had become a nationally recognized institution, helping thousands of young people find their place in the world. Students came from all over, some with no money, no connections, but plenty of heart. And every single one of them walked through those doors knowing someone believed in them. Daniel still spent most of his days there, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with oil, teaching, guiding, fixing things. Not just machines, but futures. He never stopped believing that a person's worth wasn't measured by their bank account or education, but by how hard they were willing to work and how much they cared about what they did. Evelyn, too, had changed. She still ran her business empire, but now she did it with more balance, more peace. She no longer lived for boardroom victories alone. Instead, she found joy in the little things, watching students learn, seeing Daniel teach with passion in his eyes, sharing quiet evenings on the rooftop of their home, looking out at the city lights. They weren't perfect. No one was. There were still disagreements, moments of frustration, times when life felt overwhelming. But they had learned how to fight fairly, how to listen, how to forgive. They didn't need grand gestures or expensive gifts. All they needed was each other, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden light across the tarmac where their story began, Daniel and Evelyn stood, side by side, watching a group of students finish up their final project. The young mechanics worked together, focused and determined, laughing between tasks, learning from each other. Evelyn leaned into Daniel's shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think happiness came from power, from control." Daniel smiled, wiping grease off his fingers with an old rag. "And now?" She looked up at him, her eyes full of warmth. "Now I know it comes from this, from people, from doing something real." He nodded. "Yeah, that's always been my favorite kind of work." Their lives had become a symbol of hope for many, proof that love could come from the most unexpected places, that success didn't always wear a suit, and that sometimes the right person finds you when you least expect it. Reporters still followed their story, though not as intensely as before. Headlines faded, but their impact remained. Schools taught their journey in entrepreneurship classes. Motivational speakers referenced them as an example of unconventional love and partnership. Young women looked up to Evelyn as a leader who never lost her humanity. Young men saw Daniel as proof that hard work mattered more than background. But none of that really touched them. They lived simply, focused on what truly mattered: each other, the students, the work they built together. Then came the day Daniel decided it was time to step back. It wasn't because he was tired, or because he wanted to stop working. It was because he knew the next chapter had already begun, not without him, but with others carrying the torch he helped light. He gathered the students one afternoon, standing in the middle of the workshop, surrounded by tools, machines, and faces that had become family. Evelyn stood beside him, silent but proud. "I've been thinking," Daniel began, voice steady, eyes scanning the room. "This place was built on one idea, that anyone, no matter where they start, can learn, grow, and do something great. And I've seen it happen again and again." He paused, then added, "So now it's your turn to build on that, not me. You." There were murmurs among the students. Some looked surprised, others confused. One of the instructors stepped forward. "Are you leaving us?" Daniel shook his head. "Not forever, just stepping back. This place doesn't need me anymore. It needs you." Evelyn took a breath, then spoke. "We've always believed in giving people a chance, and now we're giving you all the chance to prove what this place can be." That night, after the students left and the workshop fell silent, Daniel and Evelyn sat outside looking up at the stars. "You okay?" Evelyn asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Yeah, just strange. Letting go." Evelyn reached for his hand. "You didn't let go. You gave it to them. He looked at her, smiling faintly. Yeah, I guess I did. They traveled more after that. Not for work, but for fun. They visited places they had only read about, small towns, rural workshops, hidden garages where mechanics still worked with their hands instead of screens. They met people who inspired them, stories that reminded them why they had started all of this in the first place. Back home, the training center continued to thrive. Former students became instructors. New batches arrived eager and hungry to learn. The walls still smelled like oil and ambition, and somewhere deep inside Daniel knew he had done exactly what he set out to do, make a difference one engine at a time. Years later, sitting on the same tarmac where it all began, watching planes take off into the sky, Evelyn turned to Daniel and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that jet hadn't broken down?" Daniel chuckled. "Sometimes, but I don't think I'd change it." She tilted her head. "Why not?" He looked at her, his eyes soft, full of love. "Because even if I had missed that flight, I think I still would have found you somehow. Because people like us, and we don't follow paths, we make our own." Evelyn smiled, leaning into him. "Then I'm glad ours crossed." And so, under the wide sky, surrounded by the hum of engines and the promise of new journeys, Daniel and Evelyn remained exactly where they were meant to be. Together, building lives that proved love, hard work, and second chances were always worth believing in.